Welcome to Atal'Dazar. This is another dungeon that has multiple routes that change frequently based on the current affixes. However, this route I'm using can be used on almost every week. On tyrannical weeks or while in PuGs, it's genuinely safe to start with Razan to get Hero and Bloodlust on cooldown ASAP. Now once you jump down, engage the boss and drag him into position. Tank's primary focus is serrated teeth. This bleed dot hits like a truck, especially on tyrannical weeks, so be ready with a personal cooldown or call for an external. The group must be wary of terrifying visage. Be sure you are out of the boss's line of sight before this cast finishes or risk getting feared into raptor piles. As an undead, I just use my racial ability. Immediately following the fear, Razan will cast Pursuit, and let's take a look at a better clip showing the best way to deal with it. Here you see our Resto Druid baiting the pursuit by being the furthest player away from the boss. Once fixated, they run away down the water. By doing this, Razan will never step on a raptor pile, and it sets the group up in a position that allows them to hide from terrifying visage again. These purple piles, if stepped on by the boss or a player, will spawn a raptor ad that deals high physical damage. This can get ugly for tanks real quick. So rinse and repeat, moving back and forth down the water until the boss is defeated. And once you are finished with Razan, run up the opposite side from where you jumped down. There should be 2 Sky Screamers waiting for you at the top. While fighting Sky Screamers, it is important to interrupt their terrifying screech. If not, your party will be feared for 6 seconds, which can lead to pulling more enemies, overlapping fears, and eventually a team wipe. Up next, we're introduced to Toxic Saurids. I personally prefer to snap these mobs as they can be a strain on newer healers. By jumping to this ledge, as long as I have aggro on all the mobs beforehand, they will snap to my location. This prevents them from ever leaping on your party members, thus negating their poison claws and leaping thrash abilities. Do note, tanks will be taking a lot of claws and thrashes, so healers be prepared. If you have a ranged attack, I typically hang out here for the next pull as well. As long as nobody else pulls aggro, the next pack will also snap to you once they are engaged. You will have a Sky Screamer this time, so keep an eye out for that fear. It's hard to see, but I do drop my Transcendence here in preparation for the next pull. Any tank can do this, it's just 100 times easier and faster with a monk using Transcendence. Now, while dealing with the middle pack, you will have Saurids, but also a Dinomancer and her 2 pets. 2 pets cast Charge and Thrash, however if they are snapped, they cannot deal damage to anyone but the tank. The Dinomancer will be casting Deadeye Aim, and since it's a ranged attack, it will still connect with players, but it's unavoidable, so just heal through it. Quick Shot is cast on the tanks, but also unavoidable damage. Once the swords are dead, I like to jump off the ledge and unsnap the dinos. Their 2 abilities can be dodged fairly easy, so they don't pose too much of a threat. Plus, it allows the tank some time to kite if needed. Now, Dino Might is cast by the Dinomancers and should be interrupted, as this will heal one of the pets. If you do miss the cast, the buff can be purged. After dealing with this daunting middle pack, move on to the Pylon. It's not brought anywhere special, so let's take a look at the route. Again, this will change depending on your comp, weekly affixes, and level of comfortability with this dungeon, but it's a great starting point. You already know to jump down and engage Razan, and then exit up the opposite stairs. After you finish clearing the middle bridge and the pylon, start making your way north to Volkal's room. You could split the pulls up to whatever you find comfortable, but the main idea is to clear the trash and pull Volkal just as Hero or Bloodlust is coming off cooldown. This route also requires someone to pull the pack just outside Volkal's room once he is dead, to allow the rest of your party to make it by. Upon finishing your final Saurid pack, make your way south side, and there is only 1 pull before the pylon, and then 1 more massive pull before the boss. You can split this up, and after that, take the pylon portal to the middle of the instance and head to the last boss. Once you exit the first pylon, head up to the left and start clearing your way to Volkal. Now this is a juicy pull and only recommended once you are comfortable tanking it all, but it can save much time. There's a lot going on, so I'll do my best to break it down. Stalkers will apply a poison debuff to your tank, it's minor damage and should be dispelled. Shield bearers will cast Shield Bash, hitting the closest target to them. Tanks, be sure you are always in their melee range. They will also cast Bulwark of Juju. This reduces all incoming damage on enemies by 90%. Stop this with a stun or disorient. Also note that once the totem is dead, the reanimated honor guards will begin to take damage and spew toxic pools. Avoid them to reduce the amount of damage going out. Occasionally they will cast Rending Maul on the tank, heal through it, and use a mitigating cooldown if needed. On these stairs, there are 2 more hidden stalkers. Do not forget about them. I prefer to CC the Witch Doctor here and deal with the other mobs first, just to cut down on the group's responsibilities. Again, if you cannot interrupt the Bulwark of Juju, drag the mobs out of it. And when you are dealing with Witch Doctors, the most important cast to interrupt is Unstable Hex. This will hex a party member and continue to spread if that said party member does not make it out of the group in time. If the group does have spare interrupts, it can be a good idea to kick as many Venom Blasts as possible to cut down on some of the group damage. The second pylon we will use to skip the remaining trash leading up to Fall Call. Be sure to gather up all the Flesh Fiends, as their stacking bite is pretty nasty, and once they are under control, begin kiting to the boss's room. It's a good idea to map out who's taking which totem for the next boss, earlier rather than later, but it's an easy fix if there is some confusion. To start, as a tank, you always want to be in Volkal's melee range and tracking his Noxious Stench timer. It is an instant cast channel ability and it needs to be interrupted ASAP. Your group will always get 1 tick of it, but it is imperative that you do not let it go beyond 1 stack. This dot deals a good chunk of damage and can't always be dispelled depending on your comp. I generally tank the boss on the totem that requires the most help, but due to Toxic Leap this is not always possible. Just be sure and ready to interrupt Noxious Stench. As for the rest of the group, ensure all totems reach 1% within 7 seconds of each other, or you'll have to start all over. Once the totems do reach 1%, Volkal will begin phase 2. He will gain the Rapid Decay buff, which causes him to deal minor damage to himself, but also increase his physical damage done by 50%. Tanks, be ready to rotate cooldowns and keep your active mitigation up. He will also be spewing toxic pools, much like the reanimated honor guards earlier. Just like before, dodge them to avoid unnecessary damage. Generally, you want the melee to be stacked near the tank but never behind, as the toxic pools will quickly cut them off. Move as a group and conserve as much space as you can. Range players and healers, do your best to keep kiting path clear by not hanging out in front of the group and staying towards the middle for as long as possible. Best practices suggest you kite as far away from the gate as possible, as abilities have been known to pull the outside pack. Now for this next part, it depends on your composition, but everyone can do it. Classes such as Hunters, Mages, and Rogues have an easier time, but everyone can do it. As you see here, our Hunter engaged the pack and dragged them to the ledge behind the staircase. Once the pack is far away enough, the rest of the party safely moves through. The Hunter feigns, and the pack resets, and if you do not have a feign, a vanish, or an invis, the player can simply die and run back. Now, just like before, CC the Witch Doctor, single target down the totem as to not break the CC, and then deal with the double honor guards. Once they are dead, finish off the Witch Doctor. Now, just to address the pull beforehand for players that may have had to beat the sacrifice, when running back, use the earlier Pylon portals and just hang out in the realm until the third Pylon is engaged. The third pylon will either be the spider or the blob. Both will be handled the same exact way. Deal with the minions first, and then drop the portal on the staircase behind you. And it's much easier to kite the spider lieutenant if everyone stays in range and cycles interrupts. It's also much safer than simply taking off. Unless everyone is on the same page, someone will get left behind and wombo comboed. Now upon exiting, there's a solid chance 2 stalkers will be waiting for you, so let the tank exit first. This next pull, I try to CC one of the witch doctors and it usually works, but with double hunters they get a little trigger happy. But as long as the group is interrupting unstable hexes and stunning the bulwark of jujus, it's not a terrible pull. There is a lot of damage going out, and if your healer gets hexed, it can spell disaster. I decided to show both snap points for these next 2 pulls. I prefer the stair railing ledge, even though I do fall off in this clip, but it's much safer than trying to finagle your way on the ledge overlooking Razan's pit. And if you fall there, the run back is really long, plus the mobs will follow. But snapping is the most efficient way to deal with swords. If you are in a well-organized group, you could have the rogue tricks the mobs to you, or a hunter misdirect them to you. That way, you can get in position beforehand. Now, making our way up to Priestess Alunza, ideally you only want to pull these first 3 mobs. However, the paladin thought the augur deserved a holy shock. Now this is going to be another pull where a lot's going on, so try to keep a close eye. First things first, juggernauts do enrage. Interrupt or soothe this. They also charge and whirlwind at the end. Dodge this ASAP. Confessors will cast Bwonsamdi's mantle. Interrupt this as the highest priority. Augurs will cast fiery enchant. Interrupt this as the second highest priority. To break it down, Mantle of Bwonsamdi is the large fiery dome you see. This causes all enemies inside to be immune to crowd control effects, including interrupts, stuns, and silences. Fiery enchant will be cast on a juggernaut if they are too close to the augur. This causes them to spin around and launch large fireballs. Do your best to dodge, as the fire damage will be massive. Confessors will also periodically be casting Mending Word, healing the mob for 25% of its max HP. All the more reason to ensure that Mantle of Bwonsamdi is never casted. Once all is dead, activate the Pylon. This lieutenant will be dragged all the way to the boss's room, so once the Mind Rend tentacles are dead, be careful of your DPS. You do not want this to die early. Now this next pull should be split up if needed, however on a non-teaming or bolstering week, it's not very scary. I typically start with both Priestess and then pull the larger pack. If you are targeted with Transfusion, be sure to stand in the red pools. This will help kill the Priestess a lot faster. Do what you can to stack up all the mobs and utilize your group's AoE stuns and crowd controls. There is an Augur in this pack, so be sure it never casts Fiery Enchant. The tank will be taking heavy physical damage, so be ready. Keep dodging the charges and you should be fine. If you don't dodge the charge, this happens. Priestess Alunza is a very quick and easy fight if done properly, even easier if you can perma-root the adds. To start, the boss will periodically summon adds. These adds can be CC'd, and if you can do so, do it. If not, kill them before they absorb your group's tainted blood piles. Gilded Claws causes Alunza melee attacks to deal 150% physical damage. Dispel, purge this ASAP. Molten Gold, cast on a random player, leaves a magic debuff, and deals ticking damage. Dispel ASAP. Now when the boss reaches 100 energy, she will cast Transfusion. After 5 seconds, each player will be linked to Alunza with a beam, dealing moderate ticking damage while healing Alunza for a large portion of her health. To prevent this heal, players must absorb the tainted blood pools. This will deal damage to Alunza instead and make the fight much quicker. As the tank, I do my best to keep my back towards the pool I'm going to soak. This tells the other party members to seek a different one. Keep the adds away from the pools, as only 5 pools will spawn, and every pool not soaked is healing done to the boss. Once this boss is dead, head into the portal and make your way to the final boss. Now there's a correct way of doing this fight, but it's almost impossible to do during a PuG, and I might make a separate video that explains it a bit clearer, but for now we'll do what we can. Miasma on paper is not a relatively difficult boss, but there are a lot of moving parts, aka spiders, that can be troublesome. For tanks, your 2 primary jobs are interrupting Racking Pain, a likely one-shot mechanic, and having active mitigation up for Skewer. This just deals high physical burst damage. For the rest of the party, do your best to group up for Soul Rend. Healers note that there will be a burst of damage when this comes out, and DPS use your AoE stuns and slows to ensure the mobs never reach the boss. Now, ideally you want the group to be stacked up together near the boss's front. This is because the spiders throughout the room will become large for a portion of time and fixate a player. If everyone is stacked, the spiders will also bunch up while they're in their fixating phase, making them much easier to deal with. Once a big enough pile has accumulated, players with immunities can run over the spiders to pop them. This will get rid of the spiders, but leave behind a toxic pool. Do not stand in it. Rinse and repeat until the boss is dead. Tanks, be mindful of where your party is with their soul rends, and kite the boss away from the adds. You do not want them to reach the boss, or it will spell a wipe.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!